Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is Game 4 from the 2016 World Chess Championship match between challenger Sergey Karjakin, playing on the white end, and our current champion Magnus Carlsen. 3 games in, 3 draws, 1.5 points apiece in this race to 6.5. These two are coming off of a very lengthy Game 3, nearly a 7-hour Game 3. Game 4 is the very next day. Let's see what Game 4 would have in store for us. Karjakin opens with e4, Carlsen replying e5. We once again have a Ruy Lopez. We follow Game 2 up until move 5. In Game 2, Karjakin had the white pieces. So let's get to move 5. Let's see where things change. Right here, move 6. In Game 2, d3 was played. Now we have rook e1. One of the main differences between these two moves is that white is now prepared to potentially play c3 and then d4 in one move. b5, bishop b3, and after castles, we could potentially see a martial attack that would kick off after c3. If white plays c3, that would be saying white's c3 move at this point would be saying, I am welcome to the martial attack. This isn't something white tests. Instead plays this universal h3 move, does not commit any pawn advances on the queen side just yet. Bishop b7, d3, d6, a3, queen d7, and now we have the knight drifting over towards the queen side, quite common in this opening. Rook to e8. Take note of black's last two moves, the order they are played. Queen d7 and then rook to e8. I just want to touch on a detail or two surrounding those last two black moves. If rook e8 is played before queen d7, notice knight g5 would force the rook back. This isn't to say that something is gained with knight g5 in any way. The knight would probably do best to just come right back. In fact, he would be kicked away soon enough, and this is a desirable move. My point here is that by first playing queen d7 and only then rook to e8, now if knight g5, this is not a good move. This is something that would backfire because there is now a convenient way to defend f7. It may look a little bit odd to do it like this, but knight d8 not only defends f7, but also opens the bishop's eyes, frees up the c-pawn, we've seen this already, and is prepared to hop into e6, and on top of this, h3 will be played, kicking the knight away, and again, this is a desirable move. So, this would not be a good choice at this moment. Some players may be tempted to do this. Knight d8 is the perfect reply. So, what follows is c3, potentially looking to expand. Bishop f8, knight f1. h6 is more so about preventing bishop g5 and challenging the knight position than a flight square. This is the primary idea, to stop bishop g5 in this case. Black is now prepared to play d5, and he will have a reliable defender in that of the f6 knight. Knight on f3 to h2. This opens up a new spot for the queen. Knight g4 ID is available. Here comes a strike in the center. Let's see how white copes with this. Queen f3. White would like to have this tension resolved, so it's now hit 3 times. Queen, pawn, bishop, defended only twice. Knight a5. With knight a5, the bishop is now there as a third defense. D takes, D takes. And how will black now cope with the following threat? In fact, I should have already pointed it out. When queen f3 is played, bishop takes h6 is an idea. Queen on f3, when this move is made, queen f3, the g-pawn we can say is overloaded. It has to now watch over the knight and the pawn. So there's this idea of captures, and on a recapture, queen takes knight. So first we have knight a5, bishop back, the pawns are exchanged, but this is still back on. How will black address this threat? Knight c4. So did black miss something here? Bishop takes pawn? Is it free? Well, this is what white goes for. Karjakin captures on h6, but overlooked something. That is the reply queen c6. What is this doing? This is throwing two punches at white. Now, the bishop is being threatened because the queen is defending the knight, and the e4 pawn is under fire 3 times. So these two pieces are being attacked currently because of the queen c6 move. This is something Karjakin overlooked, and this is where Karjakin now went into a deep think. Nearly, well, something close to a half an hour was spent on this next move. What did he come up with? Well, the computer suggests the bishop come all the way back, reinforce, well, defend b2, get out of the line of fire. There really isn't any other good square for the bishop to go to. He doesn't do that. The bishop doesn't move just yet. And instead, we had the move bishop takes knight. So white is giving up a bishop for knight. What's the purpose? Well, let's see. If queen takes bishop, this will allow white to play knight g3. Notice the queen would no longer be there to defend the knight. So white would have some time to address the threat on e4 and then next rescue the bishop. Black does not capture on c4 with the queen, however. Instead, b takes c. So this is still back on. These two punches are still being thrown. It's either the bishop or the pawn that's going to fall. Of course, it's only going to be the pawn in this case. Black gets the pawn back in the following way. Karjakin drops back to e3. Now knight takes e. Material is restored. We have black with center pawn. White no longer has a center pawn, but black doesn't have an h pawn. Is this a big deal? Well, let's find out. Let's see how play follows. Is there a way to take advantage of the fact that black is without their h pawn? There isn't. White is going to be suffering for the rest of this game. Knight g3, knight d6, rook a to d1. White has to take some steps to defend the b2 pawn. The most convenient defender will be the bishop. So that's why we have rook a to d1, and now in reply to rook b8, bishop c1. This is a fine piece. He is on his home square, but I consider him developed. He's not in the rook's way. f6. Queen exchange is inevitable. Queen couldn't go too far anyhow. There would be mate on g2. So here we are now with an endgame. A bishop pair, well, the bishop pair for Team Black. But black also has a damaged queenside structure. Is this really a big deal? Well, black is definitely the preferred side here. This isn't so much of a liability. In fact, the c4 pawn, this is in white's house. It does have some clamping effect on white's queenside structure. And yeah, it kind of freezes the white queenside pawns, and there's some pressure here. I don't know how inconvenienced the bishop is, but okay, there is some pressure on white's position, and it's tough to suggest what a good plan is for white. What's a good way to improve white's pieces? The knights are a bit clumsy. They have not yet found, and will struggle to find, a good home in this game. So let's see how play follows. Knight g4, rook b5, preparing this advance now that the e-pawn is defended. f3, this ties in well with that dark square bishop. Pawns on light. Bishop is dark square bishop, so we now have f5, knight f2. The knight couldn't step foot on e3, runs into a fork. Knight f2 it is. And now the bishop looks to strike at some pieces here. Bishop h4. White challenges the pawn duo. Bishop h4 still. We have some forcing sequence. Bishop takes knight, pawn takes knight. A pair of rooks are exchanged, and here we are. Much more simplified endgame. Still, this positive is present. This is the real battle in this game. It's bishop pair versus knight and bishop. Rook d1. Black improves the king. Rook d4, rook e5, two threats in mind. Mate, and you might as well consider rook e2 as mating. Just be hitting everything, and the only way to stop that rook entry is king f1. Now we have the rooks exchanged. Bishop pair. How to convert this is black. Can white hold this is the big question. This is the first game in the match where we see black with some advantage, something that is close to a pawn advantage. The first 3 games it was always white who is at least equal. So let's see what white comes up with. Bishop g5, king g6, h4 was a very surprising move to me. Is this pawn not just going to be hunted down in a couple moves? Well, that's what happens. So let's see what the deeper idea is behind this move. King h5, knight h3. Okay, so h4 had this idea to get the knight on a different square and maybe look to hop into f4. Let's see how play follows. Knight h3, bishop f7, gets out of any, well, just gets out of the knight's reach, right? If white goes straight in for bishop takes pawn, there can follow knight f4, and on king takes bishop, knight takes bishop. This knight might go into a little bit of a Pac-Man mode on the queen side. On knight f4, king g4, there's now bishop takes bishop. King takes knight. Yes, black is up a pawn, but there's a very likely draw right around the corner. Opposite color bishops on board. Very high drawing rate. So black just gets the bishop out of the way. Bishop f7 avoids any of that knight f4 stuff. Bishop e7. So what's the idea? You take my pawn, I take yours? Well, that's what happens. But who really benefited just then? How healthy was that d-pawn? How healthy was white's h-pawn? White's h-pawn was more healthy than black's d-pawn. As if we scan the queen side and the king side, let's consider first the queen side. These guys offset. A-pawn versus A-pawn. This is where there's a big deal. The C-pawn, one pawn, restricts two. How do you get these guys moving forward? How do you create? How would white create a pass pawn on the queen side? You can't. So now the attention turns towards the king side, where there is a 2 versus 1. That can produce a passed pawn. Let's see where black makes some forward progress. First, getting the bishop out of harm's way. King e2, here come the pawns. Knight f2, king g6, and now move 43. g4. That is a big move, a really big move, and the start of a deep idea. What we witness in this game is an attempt at a fortress. Let's see if Black can come up with a plan to break it down. Bishop b6, keep some pressure on the knight. Bishop e5, a5, a move that I'm not so much a fan of. It feels like a waiting move, and I'm not sure a waiting move is really needed in this endgame, playing with two bishops. I do not think the idea is to clamp down further on the queenside structure with a4. We'll see a big reason not to put the pawn on a4 soon enough, but I kind of saw it as maybe it's best to just keep the pawn on a light square so that it's always out of reach of the bishop. And, well, I mean, you'd have to have a little bit of imagination, but if he's on a5 at some stage, if the knight grabs this pawn, he's already in a position to grab a5 on the very next move. Okay, short story, I think he was better placed on a6. I don't know how much it really, I don't know how big of a factor it is, but just my 2 cents on that. Let's see. a5, knight to d1 was played. So this tension is maintained, and it seems like Black can go ahead and pick up the g4 pawn right now, but doesn't. Black plays f4, acquiring a connected passed pawn. Let's just consider, now there's many different attempts that Black could be going for. I'm not going to touch on them all, but let's see what would happen if Black captured on g4. Knight e3 can follow. And let's say after bishop e6, bishop g3. Let's just stop for a moment. Notice the coordination between the knight and bishop. Let's consider all of the 4th and 5th rank squares that are under white's control. Let's just map them out for a little bit. All of these squares are under white's control. So what does this mean? Well, how do you make further progress as Black? How do you, let's say, improve the king position? How do you disrupt the bishop and knight position? Well, who can disrupt the bishop and knight position? Let's consider that first. The king? No. The light square bishop? No. The dark square bishop? Yes. Well, let's see. Bishop takes knight, king takes bishop. This is a dead draw. Doesn't matter that Black's up an extra pawn, opposite colored bishops. Easy enough to hold. The king tries to sneak over here, one way or the other. The king just comes over to defend. No problem at all. So this isn't a good attempt. What may be the only other attempt then to break this wall down? Well, it would have to be the king. Let me just map out these squares quickly again. It would have to be the king getting over here. Again, key reason why we are not seeing the pawn play to that a4 square. This is a path in to the white position. So suppose Black does this. Again, in the game we saw this, but I just want to touch on one of the structural, one of the possibilities that was present in this game, and that is to make the capture and then maybe head over here. What can white do in the meantime? Well, knowing that a dark square bishop for knight exchange is likely to end up in a draw, here's what white can go for. Knight c2 and knight d4, a very small but significant improvement of the knight. He's still in those key 16 squares. He's now coordinated once more very well with the bishop, and now the king isn't even able to get to the a4 square. Before he can get to the a4 square, the knight would have to be captured, but we already know on a bishop takes knight, that's going to result in a drawn position. So this would be a way, I'm sure there's some other details, but this is the bulk of it. This is the key idea. White can reposition the knight to d4, and this bishop is a super defender of these two pawns. It's tough to break down. Don't see how you pull this off. In the game, we didn't have that. What was tried was f4, bishop d4, welcoming that dark square bishop exchange. In the case of bishop takes bishop now, notice there's a new square for the knight on c3, and there would be some very good coordination between the knight and pawn. This too would result in a draw. There is a fortress in this position. Let's see what was tried in this game. One that was very lengthy. In fact, what is this? Move 47? We're only at the halfway point in this game. This game runs 94 moves. Wow. So much for having, let's say, a quick draw after a 7-hour, call it a 7-hour game 3. Yeah, this was another marathon game, about a 6.5-hour one. Let's see what attempts Carlsen came up with. Not much excitement on White's end. A lot of shuffling. The knight is defending the pawn. How do you break this down? Let's see. What is Carlsen going for? He's slipping in now with the king. He's in the way, but he can be flushed. That's what black is lining up. King b3, king d2, king b3, king c1. Now what? Have a look at the computer evaluation. It's reading close to -2. But you could take that evaluation and throw it away, because this is a position that the computer cannot understand fully. It struggles to understand fortresses, and this is what we have in this position. This cannot be broken down. Let's see what black tries. Bishop d3. The computer says you could take the bishop and get away with it, but white has already determined that he doesn't need to change the structure. He can continue making knight moves, making bishop moves, staying on this diagonal, always in a position to control or defend the pawn, or maybe strike at the g5 pawn. How does black break it down? A lot of shuffling on the white end. White is there to defend g4. What more can black try? We're going to see another attempt. As soon as there is a pawn move, there we go. Let's see what new possibilities are now present. There is something in the air. As soon as this pawn moves, bishop e3, immediately targeting the pawn. What you don't want to allow black to do is establish the bishop on f4, which would control these squares. Then all black would have to do is get the bishop here, and it would be mate. Bishop e3, it's an important move, establishing the bishop on e3. Might as well do that straight away. Bishop d7, king c1, a little back and forth here, and eventually what is tried is bishop f4, and we have the bishops exchanged. One last note is, suppose the bishop goes here. Some may think to do this, with the idea to take out the knight and then take the pawn. What's wrong with that? Well, let's see. King c2, bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, bishop takes pawn. Black is up 2 passed pawns over here, but dark square bishop, opposite color bishops, dark square weaknesses. How do you move forward with these two guys? You can't. You could get the king out. For example, you could flush the white king away, and the king can now escape and come back over here, just playing it out. Some moves. but as soon as the black king comes over, the white king can come over as well, and you're not going to successfully advance these pawns. White has dark square control. Black will not be able to successfully advance these pawns, so that would not be a good attempt to try and eliminate the knight and then win the pawn. That is still a drawn position. What was tried? Bishop f4. Bishops are exchanged, and now the king, the black king, slips away to b3 and tries his luck on the king's side. Let's see what progress is made here. Not much. Soon the g-pawn is won, but yet again, it's almost like one fortress after another. I think there's like 4 or 5 different fortresses when I was playing around with it. I was only scratching the surface with the ones I shared with you in this video. There are a few others, but yeah, some of them are quite complex. Every which way I looked at it, there was some defensive resource that white had, and this was the last defense right here. Let's see how play followed. White gets that pawn back. Material is balanced. a4 is a nice move. If black looks to hunt down this pawn, the knight would take not only the c pawn but the a pawn soon thereafter. Bishop check, king back. How do you make progress? The knight and king are enough to seal the king off. There's no getting into the queen side anymore with the king coming over here. This pawn would have to be captured first, and in the meantime the f-pawn could be picked up. There's no way forward. After king to f2 at this stage, the players finally, after move 94, agreed to a draw. How can you maybe try something more from here? If f3, there's knight f1. If king f4, there's knight d2. He constantly has pressure on these two guys. And if something like this, if black tries some kind of triangulation with the king, king g5 can be met with king g3, and next we'll have knight d2 capturing the pawn. This is a draw. So no forward progress. Black didn't even consider moving the pawn, and black did not consider moving the pawn and weakening the dark squares. King f2, a draw agreed after another lengthy game, 6.5-hour game. In this one, game 3 was about 7. Game 4, 6.5 hours, and they have a rest day in between games 4 and 5, thankfully for both the players and commentators out there. If we have a look at the tail of the tape, a little bit even for the opening, and then an issue with that decision. The bishop takes c4, move 19. From that point on, it was a struggle. Black having some advantage, Carlsen having an advantage, and at some point, it seems like it's a decisive advantage, but right around this point, it's that fortress taking shape, that move 43, right here, g4. That is a star move. I am almost certain that that is holding every which way. This is a deceptive evaluation. I believe it cannot be broken down. Sometimes, well, in some of the videos that I've shared already on this channel, the endgame studies, you'll see, that the computer is just not able to accurately assess certain positions. Well, we got to witness one of those positions in this World Championship. I believe we did in fact have a rock-solid fortress in this Game 4 of the World Chess Championship. What a very nice save by Karjakin, missing the Queen c6 move, being on his heels, but once more we're seeing some fantastic defense by him. Well, looking at the inaccuracies and mistakes, 3 inaccuracies, 1 mistake, no blunders on Karjakin's end. 2 inaccuracies, 1 mistake, 1 blunder. I don't know how much we can really trust these numbers because these numbers are being logged because of certain decisions like, let me just go back here for a moment. When the decision to play bishop f4 is played, right around here, right here, I think it logs that move as a mistake, but you can't really chalk it up as a mistake. It's black knows that, okay, I'm just going to try one other way to maybe make progress. I know I'm not going to be losing, so it just recognizes a fluctuation in the evaluation. If there's a great shift, it logs it in as a mistake, but yeah, you really can't see it. It's not really a mistake is what I'm getting at. And what more? So yeah, 2 inaccuracies, 1 mistake, 0 blunders, and that average centi pawn loss in this one is logged in there as an 8. So another very accurate game. A couple interesting quotes after this game 4 by some top GMs that I think you may find of interest. Fabiano Caruana on Twitter said, quote, "Honestly, impressive defense. Not every day that Carlsen fails to win 2 clearly better positions in a row." And one more tweet by Timur Rajabov. He said, quote, "Carlsen did not reach his top form as of yet, but I think from games 5 to 8, he will be very dangerous." What do you think? 2 interesting quotes by some top-level grandmasters, of course. As usual, feel free to share any feedback you have to this video in the comment section below. And I will catch you for Game 5. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.